Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we are looking at Spitfire Audio's Originals Epic Choir. This is the new one. There's been a bit of chatter about it, and I got asked if I would have a look. And while I'm not a real user of sample sets and what have you, it doesn't feature in my personal composition very well. I have used it and maybe again will from time to time. Spitfire's products are a joy. They think carefully enough about how they set them up. There are some oddities about them, but it's character. But in terms of what you get, their usability, I have never had cause to question Spitfire. Sometimes setting things up has been a little funny, but you know what? This couldn't have been easier to set up and install. So if you have issues, it's probably just a first-time thing, getting yourself set up with their engine and their where you put things system. But once that's done, everything is very, very smooth. No backwards and forwards about this, that, and the other. Supremely easy. And that counts for a lot. That's professionalism. They have made it easy for us to have a look at this, which is also professionalism. Slight dig at somebody else there. If you know who you are, shame on you. So what we get is the originals. The originals are a step between their free labs instruments, which are good, and their full packages, you know, Albion and BBC Orchestra and all that kind of stuff. And at 29, Euro US is about pound for pound at the moment, to mix the metaphor awfully there. They are very well priced for the quality that you get. But just don't come in assuming that the originals are the equal of a full package like an Albion or whatever's really the happening thing. I don't know their range these days. Probably what we should do is take a listen to it in action. Now, here is one I prepared earlier using a couple of instances. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances of the Epic Choir. And then a few instances of the free version of the BBC SO Discovery, because the voices on their own, you aren't going to get the kind of context or contrast. We'll look into some of the mixing a little bit later. So here is the one I prepared. And let the reverb go. Yes, that's nice. We're done. Shuttle that back. Now I will mute the orchestral parts just so that you can hear. Right. Oh. Oh, you saw the what the device looks like before. It's a little slow to load, always is. It's the typical Spitfire thing. Who are Spitfire? Well, at this point, I would kind of hope you knew that already. They have, over the last 10 or more years, put themselves in the position of being one of the most revered, valued, noted players in the soundware arena, specifically the soundware arena vis-a-vis to do with orchestra and the like. To say they have no peer is probably not fair, but they've done pretty darned well for themselves, and I think very deservedly so. So you should know the Spitfire name, whether you're into them or not. The originals, as I said, they sit between the free labs, and I did a review on a few of the labs. I'll try and find a picky and pop up there to help you locate it in the playlists of things that I have reviewed for Higher Hertz. The originals sit between, so there is a bit more to them than the free things, but they're not in the, I don't know, $300, $500, $1,000, whatever the full packages are. So you don't get a ton of stuff. But at 29 euros, dollars, whatever, do your own conversion for whatever drachma you live under, and you get a quality thing that, if you're going to use it, is going to be worth the $29. Even if it ends up only being used on one project, it's probably worth it. They say 50 voices recorded at Air Studios, the home of blockbuster scores. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Air is a reasonable name to drop here, because Air Studios is, well, pretty darn good. Nothing wrong there. I wonder, and this is merely me wondering, if they call these originals simply because they are reminding us that perhaps they are making original recordings here. Because I don't know how common it is now, but for a long while there, you could buy what was essentially the same session of samples from several different manufacturers. One manufacturer A would bundle it as, this. B would bundle it as that. Sometimes they said they'd come from the same place. Sometimes they said they'd come from somewhere else. But they almost always somehow gave the impression that they'd meticulously recorded it when they had meticulously done a deal with the people who had done the session, who then sold it to whoever was going to pay the license fees. So I hope that what originals means is that Spitfire is doing genuine original recordings, that it's a Spitfire session and that these sounds are not elsewhere. Not that it entirely matters, but it was entirely possible to end up with 2 or 3 instances of the same session. Not necessarily the same samples, because they may not have been cut up, but that did happen too. So that's just one of those wonders, but you listen to the product. As I say with Spitfire, it's always extremely good quality. And that's what matters, because Spitfire work on the assumption that we are working musicians, and we want things to, work and support what we do. The good and bad, as I said, very nice quality, very usable. And that's the whole idea. The pricing is very fair. It's not free, but nor should it be, especially if they went and hired Air Studio and 50 people to flap their gums for, I don't know, a few hours or whatever it was. That ain't cheap. The bads, yes, it is a bit limited. It doesn't have a lot of variety. But, to be very fair, it's $29. It is not the same as a full total $1,000 package or whatever. There are not a million things that you can do with it, but with a little bit of thought and care, I'm sure you can find a million things to do with it. The only, other than the kooky Spitfire interface, which I find a little confusing, but this is a little clearer, the only real thing that I had difficulties with, and this doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, but I had frustrations with the reverb. I initially set up my mix using the reverb that they provide on board, Where that comes from, I don't know. What that is, I don't know. I mean, my guess is it might be an impulse response, but whatever it is, that reverb I felt interfered. Now, that's not entirely a unique thing to Spitfire, so it's not me saying your reverb sucked at all, so do not misquote me in that. Sorry, again, I've been misquoted by somebody this morning, taking literal words, turning them to something else, and then being all kind of like, master of sock puppets. You can just, well, put your hand up your own sock. But I find with other packages where the reverb's on board, if I push that in to the mix, it just, I don't know. So what I did was what I normally do, which was nixed the reverb in here. It's not like it's vital. It's not like it's integral to the sound, and then created my own reverbs. We'll show that later. Up to you. But my point there is, if you are finding that you're getting this, struggling to get this to fit in the mix properly, maybe like me, you're just not a fan of their reverb or the way their reverb sits as a different one on each voice in the choir, so to speak, on each track, to use proper door speak, because that's just not really how it works in the real world. You have a whole lot of people flapping and squawking into one room that creates one room that's a bus thereof of their flapping and squawking. So that's really the only kind of negative that I have. Looking at the features, well, it's pretty darn simple, and that's kind of cool. So we've got, this is one of those ones where they go loot la la. Let's try and make sure that we're on this one. There we go. That slider appears to be the level. You obviously should probably read the manual. This one is a dynamics slider. This one is your reverb. Now that's pushing through my mix reverbs as well. And then you've got release and tightness. So release will be so if you've got your reverb and release high, then you give that impression of it being in a bigger space. I'll be really honest and say I have never understood what tightness is. Go read the manual if it matters to you. There are some mixer presets and what have you, if that's your thing. There are then 3 mic positions. So we've got close. Let's just turn the others off. That was at 30. Pull them out. Tree. So we would assume close to be not rapper close, down their throat, but I would assume close to be somewhere, a meter maybe or less around that section. Because these are sections, I do not believe, it's possible that I'm wrong, but you don't identify individual voices in here, so I believe that it's a mic that's close to that bunch of babes. The tree tends to be further back, so that's somewhere around front of the stage or the front of the room, as in row 1 or 2 sort of thing. They can be further back if you want more room. I don't know whether they provide pictures. I didn't see any pictures. And then there's ethereal. Kind of a funny sound, so I don't know whether that's a mic way further back in the room or just a processed sound. Provides a kind of a radio-y sound, which does pick up some of the mid to high frequencies in the voices. So in no way would I say that it was useless. I'm not sure that I'm convinced that it's Fabo on its own. But it definitely has a use, so no argument with it being there at all. As is usual, down the bottom of the screen we have the range over which these sounds will play. Sad. But Spitfire Chase Realism, not how to spread things as far across the keyboard as you possibly can. Curse you. I've always been of the one sample on middle C and will be good, mate. But that's probably showing my age. Of course, our mod wheel is set to the dynamics, and the pitch is not applied. This would indicate... Oh, hang on, that's moving octaves. It doesn't necessarily seem that you can apply the pitch wheel. Maybe there is some way somewhere else, but the question is, why would you? Because this becomes a synth then, rather than the bodacious bunch of babes in the Air Studios experience, which is what they're selling and one would assume you are buying. If you absolutely needed to, then I guess you could sample it off, put it in a synthesizer, or even a re-synthesizer, and then pitch bend to your heart's content. Ooh, drunken babes. No, don't like drunk ladies. Not a good look. In terms of presets or things that they've got, you can go through by just everything, and they've got them broken into sections, which is basically sopranos and altos, tenors and basses. So high and low. And then we've got long R's, long M's, long episodic combos. I don't actually know what it means. Again, that would be a read the book. And then these short staccato samples. What's clever with these is that you've got two versions. The first version, it just automatically randomly chooses one of the samples. And that's what you heard in the sort of singing syllables, words type thing. Crazy Latin people. Not that all Latin people are crazy, but these ones were, because they weren't making a lick of sense. And then there's the short staccato syllables, keys switched, meaning that you can key switch between the u, a, ti, ta, pu, ta, he kinds of things, and use them to try to make something a little bit more intelligible or articulated. No, that does not mean you can get it to talk. It is not going to say your name, your rapper name, in choir. There are other options for that, but it's not the idea. We've then got tenors and basses. That's a little loud for the mixing, as is that. And then you can narrow down, not that it's really that useful because it's not that big a set of things, to particular pieces. So I could say long and episodic, and therefore I get everything that meets that criteria. User patches, well, I didn't make any, so really not relevant. But as I said, very focused set, but the sound is nice. We don't have any sense of loopy stuff happening. They move over time. So there is a kind of a natural feel. There isn't any obvious sense of them looping in any way, which is super, because you don't want to hear loops, not in this kind of stuff anyway. That essentially is the feature set. So there's not much need to say an awful lot more on that. What we will do is have a look inside the mix. In no way am I suggesting that this is a great composition. It's just an off-the-cuff kind of thing, using a fair amount of repetition and then building it up to give ourselves something that probably would sound cool if it were used in the right cue or the right, married to the right bit of film or in the right situation. That's all it is. We have a pair of reverbs. One of them is, of course, Hertz delay. The other one is the reverb that comes with Reason, which is quite polite. The reason for that is because, well, it's an epic choir. It needs to sound epical. So if we take out our reverbs and go again, it naturally gets a little on the flattish side. By putting the pair of them together, we end up with a richer sound. But it's important to use the two together, not to say, oh, well, I'll send one section to one reverb and another section to another reverb, because then we can never glue those sections together. To help build the sound all up, actually, let's just pull these fine fellas out of the mix for the moment. If we take just our choir section, which is what we have here, there is another Hertz delay here. And that's driving these main reverbs. So if we pull that out, not so good. So to get an epic sound, and I have sadly seen many people who are trying to do the film sound thing and my epic this, and I'm so tired of the word epic. And their approach to doing it is just to boom, 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 loud and loud, and then bam, 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 bam. But they then think you make it epic by adding a huge amount of reverb. And, well, yeah, fair enough. But it's how you apply that huge amount of reverb. Just applying one great big reverb on the end and going, there you go. It's not epic. It's flat. It's got no movement, got no action, got no story to it because you haven't got any kind of melody. You must have some sort of melody that you can hear. There are themes in here. They repeat. You may not dig them. They're not exactly Slayer or the Buggles, but they are there, and they develop in their own way. You've got to have that, otherwise it's not epic. If there isn't a story, it's not epic. So if you're not telling a story, it can't be epic. And when you come to your space in which it happens, and you're trying to say this is enormous, like the beginning of Hobbitses, where it's panned back on I don't know whether it's actually New Zealand or Terrigen, but the snow-capped mountains, they're trying to tell us big, huge world, and you can't do that with one reverb. No matter how great the patch is, no matter how pro somebody tells you their reverb is, it won't get you there. So you do it in stages. So you can hear here how... So we've achieved a fair amount of what we're looking for here. So a combination of echoes and reverbs, and because this is here, it gets sent to these ones as well, which means that they multiply with each other. So if you have one tap here and one tap here, this has actually got two taps now. So one feeding the other. Each has got its choruses and what have you, like its movement, its modulations. So if we pop that one open, so our local choir section and is driving the reverb here. That way we can create depth and movement overall. That kiddies is where we begin to have epicness, but we also must have so we've got our basic, what we might call a chord progression. We introduce this statement, then we use it again. It rises an octave. Repetition, but different. I've then swapped around. The girls are doing the boys' part, the boys are doing the girls' part. Change the levels so they balance out. And then we start to bring in extra bits and pieces. And that is the version where every key press just gives us a different and, well, it's impressive. It's good enough for lots of people, including myself, to have put that to record a time or so. I think I've only put it to record once myself. I know Vangelis did. Several other people have. It's a cool effect when used right. But the important thing is that this is actually echoing that melody line, which actually moves a little bit as we go through. There are changes to it. And then we get to the end. And that is backed by our orchestra. If we pop that just in solo, and this is not the most elegant use of orchestra, let me tell you, it was a bit sort of throw it down, but it provides extra contrast. Something that's worth noticing is if you listen to the width and the size of the choir with and without the orchestra, or with and without the stereo-ness of the orchestra. So if we take our orchestra, narrow it down, your choir narrows down. Widen the orchestra, our choir expands with it. So mixing's never about doing one thing. It's about how does everything interact with everything else. I considered, well, can I make that choir seem even grander by minimizing my orchestra? No, because it actually pulls it out. So we try these different things to see what we get. And there's the same situation here that our orchestra has and if you look, all three of these are different. Each one is listened to and put into context of what we want it to be, where we want it to sit in depth in the mix. The reverb, well, that's where it is. The choir, I've gone with a longer delay time, and that gives us a sense of hugeness of space. It does put the orchestra slightly in front of it, but you know what, physically, that's what happens. It's rare that you have an orchestra and choir like this with the choir in front of the orchestra. There are situations where you do, depending upon who is backing who, but bearing in mind this is an epic choir and we want it to be like Epical Dude, then we want to put that behind the orchestra, even though the orchestra is very much playing a supporting role here, but it makes it seem bigger, which is why as we expand that orchestra into stereofulness, that the choir actually moves out with them. And the orchestra, we have kept a relatively short delay time, especially in comparison, because this is a total of 250. This is a total of 1,000 milliseconds on the throw of the knob, even though they look like they're in the same spot because of the switch. And you see that the second delay, which is 1,000 milliseconds in total throw, is actually slightly before the one for the orchestra. And when we look at these, this one is also slightly before. The throw on this knob is 250 milliseconds. Similar sort of a mix, but we're actually putting them in space, like this. Rather than being like this, which is what happens when you use one reverb for everything, especially if you use one huge reverb, you actually de-epicize things. You make them sound flat. And no matter how much you widify them, they will still sound flat. There's no depth. There's no sense of moving into the pictures behind or in front of the speakers. So flat as a biscuit, de-epicized, especially if there's no melody or anything. So by moving our delay times, we are creating this sense of space, one in front of the other. I didn't do anything individually. I think there may have been some EQ done. No, I didn't work on any of the instruments. I'll just pop this down, other than perhaps just to clean up some stuff. But I did actually, no, I did work on the choir parts, just really to pull up and emphasize what I want. Using all the wonderful phase cancellations and mungifications that is EQ to create, a little bit of cut and character on each of these parts. And then with the choir, just obviously getting rid of, but I didn't touch the orchestra parts except for at the center. I did not want the orchestra parts to seem more vibrant than the choir, which is part of how you make the choir seem more vibrant than the orchestra. But just a little bit of movement across the bus helps pull them together because they're all moving in the same box. They've all got that same slight phase shiftiveness that we get with a good quality EQ. That's basically how it comes together. And these are the, not tips and tricks, but just the fundamentals of epicness. Have a melody, have a theme that gets played with, expanded upon, recurs but in a different way. Different instrument, different octave, different key, backwards, sideways, but recognizable. Bam, 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 bam. There are lots of variations of that through the Star Trek universe. Star Wars embarrassment. But your themes are super important, and how you create melody is super important. If you don't have that, you've got no epic ever. And then to work with a mix engineer. If you're a composer, do not make the mistake of thinking that naturally makes you a mix engineer, or that you should become a mix engineer. If you are good at composerifying or just orchestrifying, there are some great orchestrators out there. I had a little backs and forwards with Richard Niles, who was the guy. I know he doesn't make a lot of it, but I grew up listening to Richard and his wife Tessa on the radio. By an ABC record, Richard Niles was the orchestrator, so the guy responsible for creating all the hacking and scratching. And beautiful, beautiful work. Does he pretend to be a mix engineer? I don't think so. Why? Because he knows that there are people way better at it than him. So when you have done your composing, if you're composing well, then find a mix engineer who's like a composer, who paints with sound to help translate that story into its bigfulness. Otherwise, you will probably take a formula approach to your mixing, which will actually undo what you were trying to do with your notes. I heard somebody posted in, and I think he was only sort of a bit of a note hand. I don't think he was really doing anything that we might call serious, because I don't think there was complete work. It looked like a Muse score or something or other, and the piano in it. But the problem was that while he had some really interesting ideas in there, he'd never stopped to think, how does this come across to the listener? And the lack of, even though he'd put performance detail in the notation, drawn the lines and what have you on the score, of course, they weren't played back in that way at all. So it was incredibly mechanical, all the notes chopped off, and there was no sense of phrasing. And a real pianist would be having that sense of the phrasing, whereas his was like with no phrasing at all. It was so mechanical. I can't play that badly. Don't do that. You know, if you're just the note guy but can't play a thing to save yourself, then find somebody who is going to create your phrasing for you, and that's how you're going to build up your epicness. If we were to pick something out of the rock thing, then bat out of hell. I don't know whether there's any orchestration in there. Actually, there would be, but that's not my point. The thing is massively epic, even though technically the sonic quality is because there was so much focus on the story and how it was being told. That was between Jim Steinman and Todd Rundgren. And, well, when meat was on, meat was on. So that's a different approach. That's the encouragement. Then, and only then, will you get the true value of your investment out of things like these. So $29, we can get beautiful work from this. If we've got a narrative and then mix it nicely. We could spend $2,000 and do it poorly, and we wouldn't be any further ahead. So my secret tip is, yes, get nice basic stuff, but that doesn't need to be $2,000 packages. $29 packages. I've done cool work out of their labs and, of course, out of their BBC SO Discovery, the freebie thing. I've done cool work with that, and it's not about me big noting myself. It's just I listen back to it and I go, that's cool work. But make the most of the investment that you make. The $29 here, if you're looking for a better than average ooh-ah kind of a thing with a little bit of on the inside, which you will use from time to time in creative ways, hopefully, maybe not as brutally as I did, then I think there's a lot of product, a lot of usability. Make sure you follow the advice there to really use it well, and then you're taking your $29 product and making it sound like a $299 product or a $2,000 product. That's where the real magic lies. So that was my final words, which is, it's good, it's well worth the money, but make it worth far more than the money by doing the right work. Don't cut corners, or well, your epicness disappears or fails to come in through the front door in the first place. I hope you have found this useful. It's one of a collection of products. This is the only one of theirs that I've tried in this. The labs were cool. So keep going. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe. If you want to ask any questions, not specifically about Spitfire, please, because that's for their support department, but just sort of broad questions about the material in this program, go ahead. If you want to leave some positive feedback, go ahead too. You know, that shows YouTube that we're valued, and actually shows us personally that we're valued, because that's the thing that keeps you going on doing this kind of stuff. Yeah, go out, try this stuff, get to work, and don't fall for the idea of thinking that you alone are the only person who can do all this kind of stuff. And don't use the excuse of, oh, but I don't want to spend any money, because the reality is I've done things with lots of people over the years where there hasn't been money involved. Sadly, a lot of them I won't work with again because they've given no value in return at all. They think that their existence is good enough. Many of them haven't even bothered to put a like on my next public project, which is just like, really, dude? Like, really? But a few of them have been really great, and I'll work with them again anytime. They can call me sometime in the future and say, here, I got a plane ticket, will you fly out to LA? Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there. Because you're a good person, and that doesn't have to be about exchange of money. You just got to be the right person to work with the right people. So you make sure you continue to have a good day.